Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Musoff, and we are going to learn a third method today for solving a quadratic equation, and that method is using square roots. Remember, a square root, that's this thing? Alright, so that's what we're going to learn today. Now, we've learned two methods already. We've learned how to use the calculator to graph, and that method required us to find x-intercepts, if you remember those. And the second method we learned was by factoring. Factoring was with those double parentheses, and we set them equal to 0, and we solved. Okay, the problem with only knowing those two methods is there is one type of solution that those two methods never gave us, and that was imaginary solutions. Well, square roots can give us real or imaginary solutions. So that's why this method is pretty important. Alright, there are three basic steps here for solving using a square root. The first thing is to get the square by itself. When I say square, so there's going to be a part of your problem that has an x squared in it. That's the part we want to get by itself. Alright, and then to get rid of the square, once it's by itself, we are going to take the square root of both sides. And then the very last piece is, when you take the square root of both sides in an equation, there's this extra piece that comes along with it, because taking the square root gives you actually two solutions. It gives you a positive solution and a negative solution. So, after we take the square root, we have to remember to put in a plus or minus. That's what this is right here. Plus or minus. So positive or negative is basically what it's telling us. Alright, so let's try a couple. Example 1, it says solve the following quadratic equations using square roots. So we're going to try and always tell you which method to use, so just make sure you use that method. Okay, we're going to use square roots here. Simplify your answers as much as possible. So I'm going to take a look at letter A. It says 2x squared plus 1 equals 33. So remember the first step. Let me scroll up here. Step number 1 is to get the square by itself. So one thing I like to do is actually just highlight where the square is. So that's this part right here. Notice how I didn't highlight the 2, because that's not part of the x squared. It's just the x squared that I want to get by itself. So basically the 2 and the 1, the plus 1 over here, that's what I want to move over. I want to get rid of it. Now the order is important. I'm always going to get rid of addition or subtraction first. So the first thing I'm going to do here to start to get the square by itself is subtract 1. Alright, 1 minus 1, that gets rid of my plus 1, so I'm just left with 2x squared. And then 33 minus 1 is 32. Now, again, don't forget, I still want to get this piece by itself. So I'm going to get rid of that 2, that's times 2, so to get rid of it, we divide by 2. And 2 divided by 2 gets rid of my 2, so I'm just left with x squared on the left side. Alright, and on the other side, I just have to simplify. 32 divided by 2, that's 16. Alright, so this right here is what step 1 looks like. The square is by itself. So I'm just going to draw an arrow. That's step, here I'll write it down, step 1. Okay, then step 2 is to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And that right there, that's step 2. Okay, now when I take the square root of both sides, this is where step 3 comes in. We always remember that plus or minus. So I am going to put a plus or minus in front of the square root on my other side. And that is step 3. So you can see kind of all in this problem, we've got all 3 steps going on here. Alright, what happens is the square root and the square, they cancel out. So I'm just left with x. And on the other side, I have plus or minus the square root of 16. Now, I'm not quite done, because remember the directions did say to simplify your answers as much as possible. And we just talked about simplifying square roots. We should be able to break them down and see if we can simplify. So 16, I can break that down into 4 times 4. And then each 4 can become 2 times 2. Remember, I'm looking for pairs. So there's one pair, and there's another pair. And every pair that I find, just one of those numbers comes out. So I get to bring out a 2 and then another 2. And we multiply. So that'll be 2 times 2, which is 4. So my final answer is x equals plus or minus 4. Alright, now notice how we got two answers. We got positive 4 and negative 4. That's what this really means. Let me write a little side note. X equals positive 4 and x could equal negative 4. Most of these problems you're going to get two different answers, so just if you only see one answer, it's probably because you forgot the plus or minus. Alright, let's try another problem. So, letter B, we've got 4a squared minus 7 equals 73. So same thing, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the part that just says a squared. That's the part I want to get alone. So, I am going to get rid of the 4 and the minus 7. I always get rid of addition and subtraction first, so I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And that'll give me 80 on the other side. And then, once again, I'm still trying to get this I squared alone. So I'm going to get rid of that times 4 by dividing by 4. Oops. So now I just have a squared equals, and then 80 divided by 4, that is 20. This is where all the magic happens. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And when I do that, I am also going to add in the plus or minus. I like to do it right there so I don't forget. Because sometimes you wait till the end and then you want to circle your answer and move on. But if you do it right then, you won't forget to do it. Okay, so here the square root and the square cancel out, so I'm just left with a. And then I have plus or minus the square root of 20. Now, am I done? I hope you said no, because remember, we always got to try and simplify these square roots. So I'm going to break up 20 into 4 times 5, and then 4 into 2 times 2. 5 doesn't break up into anything, so I'm just going to bring it down. Now, this last one, in letter A, notice how we didn't have any numbers left. That means 16 was a perfect square. 20 is not going to be a perfect square, because I can see I only circle a pair of 2's, but there's no pair of 5's to circle, so that 5 is going to be left over. So I'm going to pull a 2 out, but I'm going to leave the 5 inside. So the square root of 20 is 2 root 5. Now, don't forget the plus or minus, and then we have our answer. A is equal to plus or minus 2 root 5. So that means it's positive 2 root 5 and negative 2 root 5. Alright, not so bad, right? Let's try a few more. Letter C, so same process. I am trying to get x squared alone. That means I got to get rid of the 1/3 and the plus 3. I'm always going to get rid of the plus 3 first. So I subtract 3, and that'll give me, be careful here with these negatives, negative 17 minus 3 is going to be negative 20. Alright, use your calculator to double check if you need to. Now, I'm still trying to get x squared by itself, so I have to get rid of this 1/3. But it is a fraction. That makes things a little more difficult. Do you remember how to get rid of fractions when they're the coefficient? Well, let me remind you if you don't. Alright, instead of dividing like we normally would with any other number, with fractions, we like to multiply by the reciprocal. And the reason for that is because dividing by a fraction is something we can't easily do without our calculator. And even then, if we don't use parentheses right, our calculator can't do it either. So, if you multiply by the reciprocal, you'll be sure you get the right answer. Alright, the reciprocal of 1/3 is 3 over 1. So that should get rid of the 1/3. I'm just left with x squared. And over here, I just have to multiply. Now remember, 3 over 1 is just 3. So negative 20 times 3 is going to give me negative 60. There we go. Alright, and now the x squared is alone. So I am going to square root both sides. That gets rid of the square. And I'm going to remember to put my plus or minus. So even though they're two separate steps, step 2 and 3, they kind of go together. So I just try to remember to do both at the same time. Alright, so here I'm just left with x, and over here I have the plus or minus square root of negative 60. Now again, we have to simplify it, and do you remember what that negative means in terms of simplifying? I hope you're thinking I, as in imaginary, and that's exactly right. Negative 60, that's always going to be imaginary when it's under a square root. So the first thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to keep the plus or minus at the very front. So when I pull out I, it's going to go after the plus or minus. Okay, now it's a positive 60, so I can simplify it the same way I did the top two. Alright, I'll break this up into 6 times 10, and then 3 times 2, and 2 times 5. And that should do it. Then I have a pair of 2's, so one of the 2's is going to come out. and I'm going to put it with the I, so it'll turn into 2I. And then what's left over is this 3 and this 5. Multiply them together, and that's 15. So I end up with x equals plus or minus 2I times the square root of 15. Alright, that one's a little trickier. When those negatives are there, it's like an extra step, so you just got to remember to look for it. Okay, one more example. Alright, letter D. So once again, I'm trying to get my x squared alone. Well, wait a second. It already is alone in this problem. Awesome. It's going to be a nice, easy one then. So, since it's already alone, I can go straight to step 2, which is the square root. And then I can go straight to step 3, which is putting the plus or minus there. So this is going to give me x squared. Oops, not x squared. I'm sorry. This is going to give me just x, because the square root and the square cancel out. So it's just x equals the plus or minus square root of negative 9. And then once again, I'm going to simplify. I see a negative, so right away I'm thinking I. So it's I square root 9. And then we would break down the number 9. Alright, 9 breaks down into just 3 and 3. And that's it. There's my pair of 3's. So since I have no numbers left, hopefully you kind of recognized it right away, but 9 is a perfect square. So the square root of 9 is just 3. Now a lot of people will just kind of naturally put it in this order. They'll say plus or minus I and then a 3. But whenever we have letters and numbers, the number always comes first. Otherwise it just looks a little funky. So I'm going to rewrite this as plus or minus 3I, which would just be the more technical way to write it. And there are my answers. Alright, so hopefully you can see why this method is so important, because those other methods we never got we never got the imaginary answers. Now, we can get the imaginary answers. Alright, if you have any questions, write them down. Make sure to ask your teacher. Thanks for watching.